Hello, world of internet. This is Sean from Renaissance Fitness Personal Training and the Fitness Reborn podcast. And my guest today is Dr. Matt Archer. He's a chiropractic doctor and the author of the Protocol for Health: Seven Unexpected Solutions. And I believe is that your first book so
Yeah.
far?
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Okay. So, the title alone was provocative to me, and I was kind of interested by that. And here, Dr. Archer is going to join us and explain what all his book about and his protocols is, and what we can maybe do to maximize or fix our own health. So, Dr. Archer, thanks for coming on.
You bet. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. So, all right. So we have the seven protocols, or the seven unexpected solutions, as part of your protocol for health here. So obviously that's just a pretty broad topic we're talking here, because we're encompassing a whole lot.
Yeah.
Just by what I've read and what I've seen on your website already, you spread your wings pretty wide there. So yeah, I would say, well, what's the foundation for something like this? We already made note that you are a chiropractor by trade or by profession. So but you really expanded into multiple areas with this.
Yeah. Um, so I'm a second generation chiropractor. My mom started practicing chiropractic and specifically a technique called applied kinesiology when I was in junior high. And so applied kinesiology is one of the more established methods of manual muscle testing to try to get answers around nutritional issues and structural issues, and that system really incorporates a lot of aspects of traditional Chinese medicine and cranial-sacral therapy and a whole bunch of different stuff. And so she helped me over the years with that approach. And so growing up, you know, there were times where I had back pain or where I had digestive problems or different issues that she clearly helped me with. Um, at some point in the late 90s, I had kind of an aha moment where it was like, oh, it's time to be a chiropractor. I want to do that too. And so I, went through the process, went, the prereqs and all that, and went to school. And while I was in school, I started studying with the International College of Applied Kinesiology. And early on, I put my hand up and I said, this muscle testing, it just doesn't seem clear enough to me. There was a lot of complicated rigmarole and backing up and rechecking, and my feeling was like, let's establish a clear foundation for muscle testing first. Like, what if we could see the difference of strong versus weak with any muscle before we started trying to get answers about, nutritional stuff or all these other components to try to help people. And uh, the doctor who was teaching that course, he didn't really like me very much, but he did give me some interesting answers. And it took some years to put together based on some of the things that he suggested. Well, there's some people say that everyone weakens to this reflex point in between the eyebrows, but there's a bunch of things that interfere with it, and you might try and figure out what those things are. And I was like, okay, well, that's as good a place to start as any. And so by several years later, it was clear to me that there's 8 factors that interfere with that reflex point, and you can address those factors, at least in a temporary manner, within about 5 minutes of laying somebody down on the table and checking a few different things and using a couple supplements in the mouth to affect sense of taste and neurology. Um, so you can work around these few base components, and once you do that, you can see strong versus weak with any good, healthy, strong muscle with any person who's, a kind of, I don't know, normal functions. Um, I mean, up to the degree of I've had power lifters on my table where I can put all my weight on a straight leg that's turned out at an angle to test the psoas muscle, and then have them touch this point, and I'll literally put one finger on that leg and I'll say, okay, you push first. Are you pushing? and then with one finger I can push that same leg to the table. So it's not subtle. It's definitely different than what's taught in applied kinesiology in general. That when I've demonstrated this to teachers of applied kinesiology, they say, "Oh, wait, that's different. I don't think you want to do that." And I say, "Well, I think I really do, because what I see is that we stop chasing peripheral issues and we really zero in on super important positive issues that actually make a lot of sense. And rather than an endless string of supplements and new therapies, and the person has to just keep coming back forever, often over the course of 6 or 8 weeks, we can put together all the pieces, show a person how to keep it that way, and get phenomenal lasting results with just about any condition you can come up with. Whether it's, well, I mean, there's like, I don't have a solution for cancer, like once cancer is established, I don't have a way of treating it. But back pain, migraines, allergies, digestive issues, hormone issues, autoimmunity, these are things that really aren't considered part of what chiropractors treat. And so, I can't necessarily call it a treatment specifically for those issues, but we're addressing foundational components of health such that people can heal. And so, what does it take to really have good absorption of your nutrients? What does it take to really eliminate waste product? What does it take to significantly reduce inflammation, not just a little bit, but profoundly? And when you've established those 3 conditions, well, then what wouldn't heal? What wouldn't get better? Better absorption, better elimination, less inflammation. Everything has to improve, but it's not subtle how it occurs. It's like, I mean, I'll have people with issues that they've been dealing with for 40 or 50 years, and they're like, no, I'm just here for these other things, doc. There's no way we're going to fix that. I've had it for 50 years. And I'm like, well, we always manage to make those things way better or eliminate them. So why don't we just try? And I pretty much just have to put it to everybody. I'm like, look, just stick with this for 8 weeks, follow up with me. We do about 6 visits over the course of 8 weeks. And I basically get to guarantee people results by 8 weeks. It usually comes sooner than that, but some people who drag their heels around getting all of the offending foods out of their diet or things like that, maybe it takes a little longer. But anyway, the whole system works really consistently for damn near everything. And I think that's unprecedented in healthcare. I mean, I don't know where else people get those kind of results. And so it's kind of fantastic to just be, working in my little office with my hands and foods and supplements, nothing really fancy. But, I get people who've been to the Mayo Clinic and all kinds of crazy stuff and didn't get anywhere. And then 5 to 8 weeks later, they're saying, oh my God, I can't believe it was this simple, because I've tried everything.
Right. So, since you mentioned kinesiology, obviously, as someone who trains people, kinesiology is something I didn't study it formally in college, but since I became a personal trainer, it was something that I really kind of got more and more interested in for obvious reasons. Now, you mentioned that in the kinesiology course that they were just kind of like giving, surface level answers, or just kind of teaching people to, deal with problems that are apparent, but not really digging any further than that. Do you think that's kind of descriptive of the field of kinesiology in general, or do you think that's just kind of like this? This is kind of where you, or no, you were in a chiropractor school, right?
Well, let me hold on for just 1 second, because it's important to distinguish that applied kinesiology is this specific technique of manual muscle testing that's about trying to get nutritional information and other information through the nervous system. So
Okay.
it's super controversial. If you look it up on Wikipedia or something, I mean, like, I look at it and I'm like, oh, geez, maybe we can't do what I think we can do. But um, then I go back to my office and see the results. I'm like, okay, well, what I'm doing truly isn't applied kinesiology, and I took a skeptical approach to applied kinesiology. So the study of kinesiology, something that's taught at all sorts of colleges, that's definitely a different field, and that's study of movement and mechanics, and um,
Right.
a different field. But applied kinesiology is, yeah, people tasting foods or touching reflex points on the body, and no one's been able to prove that to be accurate or reproducible. And I think I know why, and I think I've put the pieces together that could absolutely change the kind of studies that you could create around that system.
So, if you don't mind me asking, why do you think it? Why do you think it's not very effective or very credible?
Well, I think the the problem of not first establishing a clear baseline of seeing strong versus weak before you start trying to get answers about all these other things, I think that's where a lot of it lies. I've talked with the people in that field who are the most published in terms of trying to prove reproducibility or accuracy in the testing. And they say, well, we can't do it, can't prove that it's accurate or reproducible. And they also point out that they're not testing simple muscle strength. They're testing the speed at which a muscle can adapt to a change in force, which means it's really about timing. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of subtlety in that kind of timing. If I jump the gun a little bit and I'm pushing first, well, then it's kind of like arm wrestling, and you might appear weak when you're not actually weak. Um, I don't uh, I know there's lots of people who use applied kinesiology who get great results and have a great reputation. And there's lots of people who have, been patients of that system, or even do self-testing and things like that where they get useful information. But what I do is different. The muscle testing is slower and harder. It really requires a person to push hard, but I'm making sure they're pushing first before I significantly increase pressure. So I take that timing out of it. And so once you've got the timing out of it, once you've got that clear baseline, uh, the answers you get are pretty different, and the things that you zero in on are really different. And with that, particularly when I had to sit down and write my book, um, of course I had to do more research on things that I had been doing for years. And in the course of that, I realized that in several places I have zeroed in on some phenomenal blind spots in modern healthcare, both mainstream and alternative. Um, and it's zeroing in on those blind spots that absolutely unlocks the results that we get.
Why do you think they're blind spots?
Well, okay, so let's see, where's the best place to start here? So, the simplest example of that is testing for negative reactions to foods. Um, so there was a point at which that was a lot of what I was doing, was particularly testing people to corn and soy and dairy and wheat. And if we could see that tasting those foods clearly changed muscle strength or interfered with this reflex pattern, then it was easy for me to say, well, this food is clearly affecting you. It's clearly affecting the nervous system. So I'm going to suggest that you try taking it out for a few weeks and see what you notice. And with this technique, there's actually patterns that can be identified that are caused by certain reactions to foods. Like corn will specifically cause a strong muscle will weaken when a person closes their right eye, and the supraspinatus muscle of the rotator cuff will be weak, and people will weaken if they touch the first cervical vertebra or the atlas, that some chiropractors only adjust that segment, or L5 also. So anyway, it's easy for me to see, to not only to test someone directly to a food by having them taste it, but also a person may come in and I start testing them and I say, oh, you're showing a pattern that tells me you've had corn somewhere in the last 4 or 5 days. And so sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you I had corn chips last night or whatever it was. Or sometimes they're like, no, I have had no corn. I know I haven't had any. And it took a while to realize that like the amount of corn that's in almost all toothpaste is enough to trigger that pattern. And so helping people find toothpaste that doesn't have corn in it is sometimes part of what we do. Okay, so back to your question. So with that approach, it's easy for me to identify if a person is reacting to a food or not. And if they react, if we can confirm that they're reacting to it and they take that food out of their diet for a couple weeks or a couple months maybe, and then run what is considered the medical gold standard of food allergy testing or food sensitivity testing, which is a food challenge, which means don't eat the food for a period of time and then eat a significant amount of it while under medical supervision and then see how sick you get. And that's the gold standard for medical food allergy testing, which tells you that none of the other tests are anywhere near as good. And in fact, when you look into all the different tests like genetic testing and pinprick and scratch and IgG food sensitivity and all that kind of stuff, none of it has been proven to be accurate or reproducible. And what I get to see is that the results that I get certainly don't line up with the laboratory tests that people bring in. And yet, when people follow my recommendations and try taking that food out, always beyond a shadow of a doubt, if the person will run that experiment, they can confirm the accuracy of the answers that we got. So it's one of those things where, okay, how can you prove that other than with a food challenge? You don't have a laboratory test to fall back on. But over and over and over with my patients, we get to see that those specific reactions to foods are way more common than I think anybody realizes, and they cause way more symptoms than people realize. And so if there was a good way to do that with laboratory testing, that would be great, and it would be accessible to a whole lot more people. So I think that is a major, major blind spot in modern medicine, that we don't have, like it's incredible that we can map out like all these incredible pathways of enzymes and all these different amazing things within the body. But, like just to develop a laboratory test to tell someone with accuracy, do they react to gluten or not? They can't do it. There's tests that sometimes point people in the right direction, and it's great when they do, but they often supply a bunch of false positives and false negatives in there as well. So it's not that there's no value to those tests. Obviously, sometimes people get pointed in the right direction, but the consistency isn't there. So I think that's one of the biggest blind spots in healthcare.
Okay, so we just don't have a reproducible methodology to really be able to zero in on where the problem lies.
Yeah, like something as simple as what should I eat and what shouldn't I eat? What it's almost like what could be more foundational than that,
Right.
And so to me, that's where it's like, once I see that, I'm like, well, okay, if they can develop an accurate laboratory test, that'd be great. But until then, if I can do what I claim that I can do, and I'm pretty damn confident that that's what we're doing, then you start to consider like, well, what could be more powerful than accurate information through our own nervous system, right? Like your body should have the answers, your reactivity, if we can interpret that in a clear, accurate manner. Yeah, it's super powerful.
Right. I think it seems like to a certain degree, that's kind of systemic among healthcare itself, though, because a lot of times when people, especially if they come to an emergency room, and they complained of an illness, but now they're there, and the symptoms have subsided, at least to a large enough degree where they're not in such pain or agony as they were maybe an hour ago, and they decide, man, I gotta go to the ER, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
And now they're there, and they're stable, and so the ER doctor is just kind of being told a story about what happened,
Yeah.
and doesn't have a clue beyond just what the doctor is being told, and now has to rely on laboratory tests, which may or may not be reflective of what was going on an hour ago. I mean, it's kind of
Sure.
like, well, hell, what do you do at that point?
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I mean, even worse than that is the person with ongoing symptoms, clearly
Right.
like they're wrecked, they can't sleep, they've got bad digestion, they've got aches and pains and arthritis and all this stuff, and they run, a bunch of tests. Sometimes if it's through alternative health, you might spend thousands of dollars on all these alternative tests, and they either come back with, well, sorry, there's nothing wrong with you, or a bunch of way far out, and like, you got to take this really strange specific supplement, and you need this neurotransmitter precursor, and it's like, those aren't causative issues. That's not getting the cause of it. Like, why can't you make that neurotransmitter? Why is there inflammation in the body? So yeah, unfortunately, those are those blind spots. Another critical issue it's phenomenal how quickly you can change symptoms is if you can truly get people to absorb nutrients. You don't see subtle changes over a long period of time. You see dramatic changes in the short term and lasting results. So, like calcium supplements. Okay. So like no study has proven that calcium supplements accomplish the things that we take it for. Like they don't reduce risk of fractures. Harvard School of Public Health has come out and said, well, there's no way a person can absorb 1,000 milligrams of calcium on a daily basis, but we give them way too much in the hope that they absorb some of it and it goes to the right place. But consistently, it doesn't. And again, the laboratory tests, you go in, you get a blood test, and they say, oh, yeah, you've got plenty of calcium in your blood. We just don't know why your bones are disappearing. And that would be an incredible blind spot. B12 supplements. People are, literally, like, established technique is to take it sublingually, try and absorb it under your tongue as if this is where we're supposed to absorb. Obviously, it's the gut where we should be absorbing, but who's addressing that? Well, more or less.
Well, I think there's a few outliers out there that actually are talking more about that. I mean,
well, absolutely, people are talking about it.
Right, yourself included.
Sure.
But as far as what you're saying is, like, it's not mainstream practice to actually talk about these things. I think you're probably correct about that. And there's all kinds of other, there's politics involved in that, and we don't need to go into any of that. But you're right. It's really hard. It's really kind of hard to really kind of to nail down for sure about what really is going on here. And there's and the blind spots are great. And it's kind of like, well, how do you really overcome that?
I know how to overcome that. It's weak.
Okay.
It's weak stomach acid. It's absolutely about weak stomach acid. So there's lots of people in alternative health are using betaine hydrochloride or HCl, essentially stomach acid in a pill, to boost people's digestion. And that's a good step in the right direction. But why can't we make our stomach acid in the first place? Well, of these 7 pieces of the protocol, that kind of the first and most important is the process of strengthening stomach acid and clearing chronic intestinal infection, or dysbiosis is what most people would call it. So when you strengthen stomach acid, well, okay, why do you strengthen stomach acid? So some studies came out some years ago that showed that when you increase atmospheric CO2, you decrease the ability of plants to uptake zinc and a variety of other minerals. So we're not getting as much zinc as we did before industrialization. And there's other things that interfere with it as well, but we need zinc to make stomach acid. So, and we can't store zinc in the body, and the amount of it that's supposed to be in the body, well, for one thing, the big organizations that say this is how much zinc you should have and this is how many people are deficient, the numbers are, you know, way, you know, they're spread across the board. It's like nobody really knows is really what it comes down to, because you'd have to find some healthy, normal population. But if everybody's, you know, if the whole world has increased CO2, then none of our plants or meats have as much zinc in them as they did before industrialization. So I think that because of that, we lose our ability to make stomach acid. So what I see is that strong stomach acid is absolutely what makes the difference between whether you can barely absorb a supplement or whether you can truly absorb, and not just absorb, but get it into the tissues where it's needed. So there's symptoms that are caused, you know, some of the symptoms caused by calcium deficiency, chronic fatigue, you know, every muscle contraction in our body requires calcium. So if we don't have enough calcium uh, in the body to accomplish muscle contraction, then we pull it out of our bones so that we can keep contracting our muscles. Um, Plantar fasciitis is absolutely driven by calcium deficiency, and the reason I know
Really?
that is that we consistently clear it up in a week or less once we can strengthen a person's stomach acid and get them to actually absorb a good quality calcium. So uh, so the ability to zero in on that and the consistency with which we clear it leaves me knowing that that stomach acid is the key. And so, but the problem is if everyone's deficient in zinc, and zinc deficiency creates weak stomach acid, which creates poor absorption of all your nutrients, including zinc, then if you just try to take a zinc supplement or a calcium supplement, you won't really absorb it. So taking zinc with betaine hydrochloride, with HCl, is how you boost the stomach acid to a degree where you actually start to absorb the zinc to such a degree that you start to make your own stomach acid more effectively, and you can take less of the HCl supplement. So I I don't know if other people are doing that, but it works really, really well, and it's a big part of my book. Um, so I see that as key to calcium and B12 and iron and magnesium and potassium. And again, I see people who've had, you know, anemia for 40 years or 50 years and been to everybody and nothing worked and their numbers are terrible. And in a few weeks, their energy's way up, their blood work is totally turned around, and their MDs are going, what the hell happened here? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what happens when you strengthen stomach acid. So again, in terms of a blind spot, you're like, okay, look up studies on strengthening stomach acid. Well, very few have been done. And the way in which the studies were done, it's often about studying stomach acid while people are fasting. Well, it's like, well, we don't need acid in our stomach when there's no food in there. We need to be able to digest the food. So what kind of
Mm-hmm.
study, what, you know, like, okay, it's easier to isolate it when there's nothing else in the gut, but that's not all that functional, is it? I mean, it's like, doesn't really make any sense. So is that intentional so that those studies can't prove anything useful, or is it just a reductionist point of view that doesn't, you know, can't account for biology and the complexity of life? I don't know, but
So is the the mineral deficiency like zinc and calcium? Can you not really fix that on your own just by eating foods anymore? You have to. Is it really kind of required that you do some sort of supplementation to really get you to the level that you need to be?
unfortunately, that's what I find. You know, even people who eat just like good backyard produce and,
Hmm.
either wild or free range meats. Um, I don't see, it's easy with my testing to say, like, I think you're deficient in zinc, try this protocol. So, um, uh, so yeah, that's pretty consistently what I see. And once you've got weak stomach acid, I mean, we're supposed to get zinc with every meal, and then we can't store it in the body. So once you've got that weak stomach acid, then yeah, even our ability to get the nutrients out of our food is diminished. And those studies in the Lancet show there's not as much mineral in those foods as there was before industrialization anyway. And of course, there's other complicating factors about, like the more that we eat a plant-based diet, the less we can absorb zinc in particular. The
Hmm.
phytates, chemicals in plants that interfere with the absorption of zinc, means that meat is the best place to get zinc,
Right.
and that plants really interfere with the absorption. So yeah, unfortunately, uh, I don't see just a good diet working our way out of this.
So one thing I'm curious about is like you mentioned a couple times is that the amount of zinc in your foods, now in a post-industrialized world, is much lower than it was pre-industrialization. I'm just sort of curious, is like how did we know today that the amount of zinc in the food pre-industrialization was much higher and much greater degree than what it is now?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And um, of course, to know that with accuracy, I don't think I don't think we do. And I think
Hmm.
that the numbers probably get underestimated. I know that the significance of it gets underestimated. Um, but the way some of the studies were done was, with two greenhouses side by side, and one with elevated CO2 and the other with normal levels, and then analyzing the plants that came out. And often the ones grown with more CO2 were like bigger and bushier and looked good, but the actual mineral composition was lower. So I think they really just have to extrapolate from there about what was going on before industrialization and further back in history. Um, I don't think they really can know exactly, and that's why I'm saying, well, these studies support my idea, but I don't get to know. I just get to see it with my patients. Like, yeah, when we supplement this way, we see phenomenal changes. Weak stomach acid is absolutely the cause of heartburn, which sounds opposite, but plenty of people in alternative health know that if you supplement with HCl or other acidic things, you can control heartburn. But it's a bigger, more common issue, and sometimes harder to resolve than people realize. But um, nausea, people who just can't eat. I mean, I've had people who've lost a frightening amount of weight over the course of a month because they couldn't eat. And then we start them on zinc and HCl, and a day later they wake up and eat chicken apple sausage and can eat a fair amount, and they feel good and they can digest. I mean, the elderly, it's known, it's just kind of normal that as people get old, they lose their appetites and they get heartburn. And because they lose their appetite, they don't eat so much. And so they lose all their muscle mass, and that's sarcopenia. And that's, the route
Hmm.
to lost quality of life. So the, it's fantastic the difference you can make when you boost someone's stomach acid. You can take a person who's barely eating and pretty quickly restore a healthy appetite. And zinc is really part of that if you can use the two together. Um, I mean, I've seen people, I had a Vietnam vet in practice a couple of years ago who um, he had all these different health problems he was going to the VA about. They thought it was like from his old Agent Orange exposure. And then by, 6 or 8 weeks later, he was feeling really good. And the VA was like, get out of here. You're fine. Your kidney tests are all good now. And then that summer, he went home and hand dug a massive French drain in his backyard and put on a significant amount of muscle mass. And like he'd never been able, I mean, he hadn't been able to do anything like that for a long time because of pain, because of limitations in his body. But then to actually be able to put on muscle mass was about the fact that he could absorb, and strong stomach acid is the key.
So when I was reading your little biography on your profile here, there was a passage that was kind of like, it was I don't want to say funny, but just kind of like humorous in a way to me. It was kind of like the unifying principle of my practice is simplification.
Yeah.
So uh, now simplification that wasn't really a word that I was thinking of when I was looking over your whole work here. It's like simple does not seem to jump out at me as descriptive of what you do.
That's,
Um,
yeah.
because we have like low carb, paleo, ketogenic diets, principles of ancestral health support for diet and exercise and supplements. It seems like kind of a lot to really take on here. So just kind of make it more digestible, no pun intended.
Right.
Um, how do you simplify things to people? So okay, let me start with this. What do you say are one? What's the most common problem that people come to you? I know you're a chiropractor, so that's probably maybe that is the reason why people first come to your door. But then when you're addressing all the other things with them, how do you really get them on this program of yours to really kind of rein in their health holistically?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair yeah, that is a I agree, it is kind of funny. Like, um I mean, how do I describe my solution as simple when
Mm-hmm.
it's so challenging to put it all together, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if people come in to see me and they have like occasional aches and pains, no big deal, and they're not really motivated to do anything very significant, I'm like, this probably isn't a good fit. You should probably go see a chiropractor who just does regular chiropractic adjustments, and they can probably get you out of pain just fine. Um, the ideal people for my practice are people with significant chronic issues, chronic pain, um, migraines, allergies, even autoimmune conditions, which again, I don't really claim to treat, but we just work on total health, and then the results are profound. Um, so, how do you make it simple? I mean, unfortunately, it is a lot to put together. I mean, my book is designed so that an ambitious do-it-yourselfer could pick up my book and potentially walk themselves through it. But the number of places where you can miss the track by, not getting the instantaneous feedback. I mean, if I can test somebody on the table and I can say, "Oh, look, you've been getting corn," and they're like, "No, no, I really don't think so." Always we look, down all the different avenues where it could be coming from, and eventually we get it sorted out, and they get it out, and then they see their symptoms change. Or, like on the table, it's really easy to identify if the pancreas is stressed. Pancreas shows up as stressed within this protocol, either because a person is eating too many carbohydrates, or they're getting too much high intensity or anaerobic exercise, or just standing on their feet all day without getting gentle aerobic exercise like the walking that we did all since prehistoric times. So, um, it's easy to identify when that component comes up, and people are like, "Oh no, I think I'm really doing it right." And they're like, "Okay, well, what are you eating?" And they're like, "Well, I do like my, fill in the blank with whatever carbohydrates in a few different forms." And then we can say, no, that's probably too much. Or I say, "What's your heart rate getting up to when you're on your walk?" And like, "Oh yeah, it does get pretty high when I'm climbing those hills." Okay, well, that's taking you to anaerobic instead of aerobic. So that feedback is really important. So, um, how does that make the practice simpler? how does it explain simplification? Um, the way that I think that things are simple is that most people are actually dealing with the same primary 7 issues. And a lot of people don't want to hear that because they think that their issues are particularly unique or particularly complicated. And that's fair and that's true. Um, we all have our own ways in which these underlying issues express themselves in different ways and create a whole variety of symptoms. And the process of walking people through putting those 7 pieces of my protocol together, um, it's, let's see, where am I going with that? Um, that process of walking people through the protocol is unique to every individual who comes in, and everybody's got their own sticking points. Some people, when we're increasing HCl, there's an issue. Some people, when we're clearing dysbiosis, there's an issue. Um, the amount of protein that I think people should be eating on a daily basis is higher than what most people eat. Uh, if you don't strengthen stomach acid, you can't really eat enough protein. And so um, it's my job ends up being repetitive in a lot of ways, and that we're just applying the same main solutions. The tricky part is trying to figure out how to match each individual, um, meet them where they're at so that they can focus on the pieces that they can do and not get distracted or discouraged by the pieces that they can't do. Um, so that they can put the whole thing together. It's where I say, if you just hang in there for 8 weeks, I guarantee you this stuff is going to get better, because we don't miss. I mean, in the last 7 or 8 years, we just don't miss it. People will hang in there and follow through. But the number of people who are like, no, I don't think it's about my diet, and I don't want to stop eating that. Or, ooh, that supplement made me feel strange, and I don't want to take it again. And it's like, well, you got to have a little tenacity to
Mm-hmm.
to apply these pieces, and that's where, yeah, people who are motivated are the right people for my practice.
Right.
And so that can be athletes. I mean, like, I have helped athletes who were healthy and in good shape, but wanted to be stronger. And the kind of the patterns of muscle weakness that we identify absolutely affect strength and core strength. So, like, um, I'm a chiropractor, right? So people come in with back pain, and what I see as the primary cause of back pain is what most people call dysbiosis, but I call chronic intestinal infection. Something living in the intestine that shouldn't be there, which just about everybody has at this point, because weak stomach acid is what allows pathogens to get past the stomach acid and into the intestine. And then once they get there, they've got a good place to live with a constant food supply. And we don't have a very good internal mechanism of kicking them out. So, um, people do all sorts of, natural forms of poison like wormwood, black walnut, cayenne, oregano, and stuff like that to try and kick those things out. Or they take probiotics all the time or eat fermented foods. And it's great when those things help. And when people come in and say, oh no, these things really help me, I got to keep taking these, I say, great, then keep taking them for now. But 2 weeks into this protocol, you'll be able to stop those and you'll only feel better. And consistently, that's what we do. So, um, again, great when those things help, but I think there is a deeper solution. If you have to keep putting probiotics in, it's because there's something living in the gut that keeps killing off what you keep putting in. But the solution is way simpler than people realize. We use a 3-week course.
Right. Well, well, I mean, I throw it out there because I just know from my own experience, like I think people kind of have a hidden conservatism where they sort of just like reject or fear anything that proposes anything that's too radical, sounds too radical, changes too much too fast. And you have these folks that come in that really don't want to completely upend their lives and their diet, or and they just kind of want the quick fix. And so it's kind of like, I guess it kind of leads me to another question, like, is it really all or nothing, or have you had people come in that kind of do part of it and still see great results, or is it do you really have to be all in? Oh, that's a stopwatch on my part. You know, at certain time of day, it will quit here in a minute or so. Just don't worry about it. Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, it's me. You're gonna start somewhere. Yeah. So there's also something here I noticed here, and I highlight a lot of portions of your story here. You said, I combine skeptic, mystic, science, and spirituality. Now the science is apparent, okay, and the skeptic, you talked about that at the top of the hour here about when you were going through school, and you were taught things that just intuitively did not make any sense to you. Um, but the spirituality and the mystic part of it, explain that a little bit further. Mm. Is it kind of similar to along the lines of the old saying that there's no atheists in the foxholes, something like that? No. So where are you going with your work now? So you've put down a pretty firm, foundation here about, with your book, with your practice, and you've got, quite a few years now of people who can come back and say, yes, this worked very well for me. So what's the next step from here?
You're still hearing me?
I
Okay,
got you.
cool. So the reality for me is that um, I'm not as busy as I want to be in my practice. I mean, um, often somebody comes to me with lifelong issues, and we work together for a few weeks, and then we're pretty much done. And so I don't fill my practice with people who I'm seeing over and over again for forever. And I'm, like I'm a chiropractor, but I'm mostly looking at the underlying reason that people need chiropractic adjustments in the first place, more than just doing adjustments over and over and over. So
Mhm.
um, it's a weird niche to be in, also in kind of not as busy as I want to be. So that's part of why I published the book. But part of why I published the book is that the consistency with which these things work is so mind blowing that when I felt like I was sitting on a solution that everybody should know about because it's profoundly effective. Like if people knew how simple the gut microbiome issue is to resolve and how many issues it relates to, and really took that in, like, I'd have a 100-year waiting list or whatever, is to first fill my practice and make sure I've got the foundation to do the other things that I want to do. But like, you know, like I ran a study out of my office some years ago to try to prove some points, and I mean, we got a phenomenal result. And I'm not a researcher, and I, didn't have an ethics review board uh, determine if it was ethical to ask people to take dairy out of their diet, and so I couldn't get the damn thing published. I published it in the back of my book. Um, so um, the kind of studies that we could run with this, I mean, even just observational studies, I mean, if I think I'm going to run a study before too long about migraines out of my office, because, if I could get 10 people come in who've got frequent migraines, and as long as they're motivated and follow the protocol, then 8 weeks later, they'll know that they don't have to have migraines. And, who makes that claim? Like, nobody. Like, migraines are, well, some people get relief sometimes, but, I'm, again, just kind of my skeptical nature means that to some degree, testimonials kind of drive me crazy because, I've heard testimonials for everything, and sometimes they're for things that are kind of ridiculous. And the reality is, like I point out in the beginning of my book, that like sometimes people get kicked by a horse and it cures lifelong back pain. Like, okay, great. So, you know, sure, everything has the possibility of creating a miracle, and miracles are awesome.
Yeah,
And
they're
I hope
they're very
everybody gets one.
subjective and very personal.
But
That's for sure.
what really matters is how consistently can something work. Like if somebody comes to me with low back pain, and it's chronic low
Mhm.
back pain that they've had for you know a year or 10 or 20, to be able to guarantee that we can at least make it way better, and we often make it go away completely, and we never miss. It sounds absurd, like that's not the results that people are getting. But again, if we could just run a few observational studies that showed that consistently we were doing that, like, would that get more people to pay attention? I hope so. Um, so, like, you're the second podcast that I've come on, and just trying to put this idea in front of as many people as possible uh, is where I'm headed right now. I mean, I wish you were all neighbors so that it was easy for you to walk in my front door, and 8 weeks from now we'd be saying, "Man, all those symptoms are gone. That's super cool." Um, but in the meantime, there's my book, which can help people to work on their own. I do. I can work with people remotely, uh, and yeah, there's limitations of that, but we're able to uh, do a lot that way. And then particularly if we get stuck at some point, if somebody can make a trip to see us, then we can usually sort out anything that we didn't get previously. Um, and I'm in Northern California, so like I have people come to me from San Francisco Bay Area and Sacramento and Reno. Um, so, but yeah, the long term picture. I mean, if I can really make this fly and get enough people to realize the value of it and be excited about it, then yeah, like teaching classes through the International College of Applied Kinesiology. But, will they be willing to try something different? I don't know. Um, but, if we absolutely have the potential to totally transform healthcare for those who are motivated enough to actually do something about their health. Um, since most of the time, the advice that we get about diet and stuff often doesn't really make much difference. And, people are told to exercise and eat a good diet, but nobody has any idea what a good diet is anymore. It's like, well, some people do really well on carnivore, and some people do really well vegan. And I think it makes sense to eat what we ate before we invented agriculture. But if you have weak stomach acid,
Right.
then red meat in particular becomes pretty difficult to digest. But if you address those things with a few simple supplements, then people can eat what we were designed to eat and feel good and eat protein frequently. Instead of intermittent fasting, eat protein frequently to keep the blood sugar really stable. So,
Right. So we have a closing tradition on the podcast where I give the guest the final word. So if you could maybe, summarize at least most of everything you said and leave people with maybe one thing to
it
remember.
just
And,
seems
and
like
if they could remember
people
nothing,
are
if you want them to remember this,
so
what would it be?
conditioned to believe that there's nothing to be done about our aches and pains, and that they've tried everything, and that there's no solution is going to work. And so I'm always, touched and inspired by people who have been to, maybe dozens of other practitioners before they came to see me, and they're still willing to try. And so, there's a lot weighing on all of us these days. And so, the willingness to continue to try is, I find that really inspiring. So, I guess I'm here to say, if you need a solution, I got one. And hopefully before long, we'll train up thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of other people who can deliver this solution as well, because it works. And so don't give up. And there's lots of routes to healing too. So, maybe you just tell your knees that you love them, and maybe you'll get there that way.
Oh, there you go. Dr. Archer, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. Nice to be here.
Good, good. Yeah, all right. So, Dr. Matt Archer, he is a chiropractic doctor based out of California, the author of The Protocol for Health 7 Unexpected Solutions. And I'll, of course, put contact his website and social media contacts I'll put on the show notes, as always. And and especially if you're in the Northern California area, if you're listening to this, go seek him out. And especially, I'll put the book on the show notes as well. The connection to Amazon, you can buy it from there, or you can actually even buy it directly off your website, can't you? Yeah. Okay. So that'll be all available for you. But again, Dr. Archer, thank you for your time. It's been a very intriguing conversation.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate you. All right, everybody. Until next time, move forever. Peace.